Alright, let's start working some details here. Alright, so again, I'm going to start up in this case, I'm going to start up here in the flower. So I just grabbed a smaller brush, and I'm going to come into my red now. And with the detail layers, everything is going to be a little bit less water and a little bit more paint. Alright, so I just pushed up a little bit of a more intense red here. And again, we don't have pink, we don't have magenta, so we're just going to use red, and we're going to kind of make that white of the paper create the brightness. Now there are some darks in here, some lights, and again, that area of center here, I'm going to take a clean brush where I've got those edges that kind of flail out. I'm going to just put clean water in there. Not too heavy, it's not puddling. It's just an area of clean water, so that as I get up against it with this more intense red, it's going to create a nice soft edge. Alright, see a really soft edge there. Again, I can't come into this now with lines, right? I've got to paint the whole area, especially now because I'm using a small brush and I'm using more pigment. Alright, so I'm filling the areas with color, and at the same time I'm still maintaining that textural quality. Yes, this is a smooth area of flower, but I also see right up against that edge, nice and soft. There's some highlights in there. Okay, so I'm going to continue with this textural application, and I'm going to put in some of the darks, some more of the darks later. Again, it's a slow build. Now in this area here, I've got that soft pink. I'm just going to come in again with some clean water, soften that edge. See where I just took those brush strokes up against that, it got pretty harsh. So I'm just gonna lighten that up again. So now as I come in here with the bright, it'll keep that edge soft. Now this shadow in here, obviously I've got some red, and it's a shade of red. So I'm going to take a little bit of red, and I'm going to use the complement to shade. So I'm going to take a little bit of green, and I'm going to put in that shade of red, maybe a little bit more red in there, and use the shade complement instead of using black. Like I said, black can be very, very harsh. So I got some areas in here too. I could put some of that shading in. And I can use that in other areas as well. Like up in here, I've got some darks. So this is where I start putting in some of those details and tightening things up a little bit. Alright, using the shade complement. Now that's pulling some area up, right? It's lifting some of the paints as this area is still wet. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit. This is dry on top, so I can put this in. Now I want to pull back and get in some more of the pink, soften that edge right up against that. I've got the same thing in here in this shaded area. Okay, so this whole area in here, I'm going to mix up a good amount of red and green. So I'm just going to come right in here where I got my green mixed up. I'm going to create that shade right along here since this is dry. A little more red in that. And you can see it transitions out here. So I'm going to do a gradated wash with this shade right here. It's darkest in here. So I'm going to put in the first layer of that here, and as it transitions over to this edge, I'm just going to use clean water and I'm going to pull that value over. So just clean out my brush, take some clean water, a little bit of excess off, and I'm just going to pull that. I can see I need a little bit more in there. And pull that gradation over. And if it's still too light later on, I can always go back in and add another layer and make it a little darker. So now I'm going to come up in here with my red and continue to just finish the next layer on the flower while I'm letting other areas dry. So I can go back in over here and add some detail. Alright, as I get into the shades of green, again, shading green, if I'm looking at some of the colors of green that I have, I've got yellow green, but then I've got this darker version of the green right here. And again, if I do the same thing that I did in using the complement shade, so I mix red and green, I could take a scrap piece of paper and I could put down some washes, which I've done here, and they're dry already. So if I want to kind of create that shadow going across there, right, you can see how I could do that with the mixture of the red and green. And it's lifting up a little bit of the green underneath, but see how it's kind of lifting it up? That's okay. I can then let that sit and dry, and I can continue to darken that a little bit. Because if I go in with black, and this is why I'm saying don't use black, right? If I go in with a pale gray of black, it does the same thing. It lifts up some of the color, but it darkens it. It actually shades it more than I want. So complement shade is the best way to work in watercolor. Even here where I've got this, the yellow-orange. If you look at the color wheel, across from yellow and orange is blue and violet. So if I mix up a little bit of a blue-violet, let's see what happens. So if I take a little blue, little violet, and shade, this is the yellow-orange here in the stem. Maybe a little bit more blue. Okay. That's going to be a little bit more believable with that pale wash of blue-violet than if I came in, again, if I came in with a shade and made it black. Okay? You can see the similarities, and it won't get too harsh. Because again, if I go in with black anywhere, you can see how strong that gets really fast. And it's hard to get that black off. You know? It's always going to create that roughness in the shading that you don't want. So try to always use the complement shade. So as I come into these areas here, I've got a few areas in here. They're not really shaded on these leaves here, but it's a little bit of a shade of green. So if I come into my green, again, I'm going to start with a little bit less water, a little bit more pigment, and I've got some of that complement shade already mixed up here. Take a little bit of water off, and now I can just use this to accent. Just pull in some of the darks, add a little bit of texture, and start to create some separation, right? These two don't look like there's a whole lot of separation in between them. So I can see that this darker edge, with this small brush, you can see I'm just following the shape of the vein, and then it's a little bit darker down in here. That's creating some edge of separation between the two pieces, between the two leaves. As I'm doing this, I'm trying to not press too hard. I'm trying to just texturize and stain. Because if I press too hard, I'm going to lift. I'm going to lift the color that's underneath off, and I don't want to do that. Just want to accent and add the dark values in. Just create that shade right on top. Now, I can see that hard edge right there. I don't really have that hard edge here. I want to soften that. So I'm just going to clean my brush out a little bit, take the excess water off, and just come right along that edge with some clean water and just soften that edge of separation. Alright? I'm going to continue that process as I work my way across the rest of the flower. I go back and look at it from a distance. It took some time, and I see that there's some colors that I need to punch up. There's some yellow glows that I want to use that glazing technique on. So if I come in with my yellow, and I don't have a lot of water, okay, so I'm just going to use the yellow as a way to glaze. Like I've got some brightness on this edge here. Of course my brush is damp, not totally wet. Okay. You can see down here has a little bit more of that glaze. A little bit of a green in there, so we'll grab a little bit of green, that yellow green. This leaf's got a little bit more yellow to it. Alright, so I'm just going back and kind of adding a little bit of a glaze technique on top. Just kind of punch up the light where I can see the brightness, right? There's some brightness in here.